Hey sis! From coast to coast, we're bridging the gap between the cisgender and transgender community, creating meaningful dialogue and space to learn and grow.
Join us as we connect with our community, break down tough conversations, and get comfortable being better humans.
I mean, if you ask, like the trans composers that I know, if you ask them if their music is transgender because they are transgender, you're going to get the full gamut of responses. You're going to get, yes, of course, my music is perfectly and completely transgender, and you can't take that away from me. If you're performing my work, it's going to be trans music, and you have to cope with that disrupting your system. You're going to get other people who say, of course not. My music is not transgender. My music is just music.
Have you ever looked behind the curtain and did a deep dive about who the composer or artist is?
Do you ever consider what draws you to the music you love? And how that is linked to your identity? What if you're a trans composer? How does that shape your music? Or does it?
Today, we're joined by Hope Salmonson, a composer and student at Mount Allison University, who is the heart behind the research project Transgendering the Musical Score, exploring transgender identity through composition.
Thank you for joining us today, Hope.
Yeah, this is a little new to me, my first time on a podcast.
So how do you two know each other again? Give me your background.
I can elaborate, I guess. So Hope and I met, oh my goodness, 2013, 2014, early like 2010s, at a youth project camp. I believe it was Camp Seahorse, and I think we also did go to Camp Coyote a couple years after that. But yeah, so we first met there, and then we just kind of hit it off. And I believe we also have the same birthday, if I'm not mistaken.
I love that. That's amazing.
So maybe I'll kick things off with a bit about yourself. Where were you born and where do you call home?
Yeah, well, my name is Hope Salmonson. I am from Halifax, I suppose you could say, but I was really raised rural, out on the eastern shore of Nova Scotia. And I now, for the time being, call Sackville, New Brunswick home, as I'm just finishing up my Bachelor in Music here at Mount Allison University. But I feel there's a relationship between the Eastern Shore and a small town like Sackville, where the rural environment really sort of has been my norm. So my home, so to speak, has really been on a lot of digital spaces. So geographically, I'm in Sackville. Personally, I'm in my chat rooms and my group chats.
Just for our listeners who might not know, so Sackville's right on the border, isn't it, of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and Mount A or Mount Allison University, where you're at right now. Actually, my one of my kiddos just got accepted into there in September, so they're heading that way, and we're super excited about it. It's I think currently the top undergraduate university in Canada, so it's a great place to be, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's I was listening to a stream recently where the host was talking about university, not even as the school itself, but as the people you meet there. I mean, that's especially the case in music or fine arts, creative writing, what have you, where my experience at this university has only been as good as the people that I've met here, and the connections that I've made have really been able to sustain me, and I feel like they'll be what propel me into the future.
Oh, I
That's
love
amazing.
that.
Yeah.
Mhm. So tell us, so you're just completing right now your undergraduate in music. What sparked your interest in music composition?
Well, music composition sort of came to me at a time when I needed something. As Isaac may know, from me being in high school, I was a tubist. That was my thing. I played the biggest brass instrument, and I could boast about that in any fun fact session. And I always knew that music was where I wanted to go, sort of following in the footsteps of my family, who really had a rich musical connection with each other, playing in, family bands kind of stuff. When I went to university for music, I was dead set on performing, being a professional tubist. And then when I stepped into the institution, really, of music, no longer just playing in band for fun, but really needing to focus my life around music, I was uh, I was hit with the realities of what the industry and the institution, and especially a conservatory environment, entails. So in performance, firstly, I mean, the financial side of it is classic. Tubas are big and they are not cheap. And I found out, the tuba that I had, as much as I loved it, I needed two tubas, and my tuba fit neither category. So I was two, $20,000 instruments behind. And I also saw a lot of energy in the performance realm that didn't really jive with me. And a big part of that was in composer representation, where if I wanted to be playing in any orchestra, or if I even wanted to get into grad school, the audition list involved a lot of names whose philosophies or whose ideologies I blatantly disagree with. And the reality is, where there's one tuba in the entire orchestra, and sometimes there's only one orchestra in the entire province. Nova Scotia is lucky to have more than one. If you're not willing to play Wagner or Strauss or whoever, somebody else is waiting in line, and the orchestra will happily take that person. So I was sort of stuck halfway through my degree, realizing that the path I was following wasn't leading somewhere I wanted it to go. And composition came to me in a way that I wasn't seeing the music that I wanted to play. I wasn't seeing, firstly, music by a trans woman. And I wasn't seeing music that reflected my personal and musical interests. So I just kind of started pen to paper. In the composition courses, I started making small things. I very much had a go get 'em attitude, and my professor, Dr. Morse, had to sort of reel me in, make sure that I learn what I'm doing before I run with it. But I found in composition a way to express myself as my whole self, not having to wear dark clothing to hide the trans body behind the instrument. So it's really been a matter of personal expression, ideological satisfaction, and simply the music I wanted to hear.
Can I ask, just when you said, like, with regards to like the ideological idea that if you're not willing to play something like Wagner, that there's so were you speaking to yourself specifically, like, around that? And were those ideologies formed as part of the intersections of being transgender, or is that just more of a general ideology that's not related to your identity?
I think it's more of a general thing. Surprise, surprise, you don't hear much about trans identity when talking about the greats of classical music, if you will. I mean, Wagner is known for his anti-Semitism. His works were held in high regard by the Third Reich. And there's a lot of composers through the years and the centuries who had the same issues and the same questions coming up. Classical era composers in, the late 1700s, how many of them were related to slave orchestras in the transatlantic slave trade? Hector Berlioz in the 1800s, his main piece that he's known for was a result of him stalking a woman that he saw performing Shakespeare. So it comes in a lot of different composers through the eras. It's sort of like a don't meet your heroes kind of thing. Where that Berlioz piece was actually my favorite orchestral piece going into university, and I was so excited to play it, and I researched it, and I was like, wait a minute, and the illusion was broken. So there isn't really anything specific to trans people there. I mean, sure, there are probably people even who compose now who don't have any respect for trans folks. But I mean, as far as I know, the trans identity is something that's always been parallel and separate from the classical music community.
Well, and I think personally, especially when thinking about classical music, it's not, and I apologize, I'm very terrible with like music terms. But it's not kind of like the standard pop music that we hear nowadays, where a lot of politics and emotion and ideological opinions come out very overtly. With classical music, it's very covert. So you really have to kind of like dive in and do the analysis to be like, okay, like what was the passion behind this? Because there's usually not a whole lot of vocals, there's usually not a whole lot of, those sorts of things to make it very clear what people are talking about. So I think that's really interesting, because when we hear classical music, we usually just hear it, we don't think about it. So it's nice to have that perspective on that, and I think it's really important, because especially someone like yourself, people who are composing and coming from, whether it be marginalization, there's so much more passion and emotion that is embedded in that, and we need to start looking at that.
It's so fascinating, like Isaac, and Hope, because it's so true. Like, I wouldn't necessarily, well, I have listened to the music and it makes me feel a certain way. I maybe have been guilty of not really looking behind the history, behind the title, and behind the history of the person. And that's something I will definitely do now. This is like, has kind of like flipped this light bulb. But it begs to say, like, as say a young gay person, or a young child that's Jewish, that maybe is listening to a song and it makes them feel so great and helps them through a hard time. And ironically, they might not even realize the connections to the person who wrote that song being anti-Semitic, as you said, or homophobic in a way, or connected to the slave trade. And yeah, I mean, it's a whole conversation in itself, which makes your research project even more, I think, exciting.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that question of, how do we relate the composer and the music, or the singer and the music, the painter and the art? And in a lot of points throughout history, there's been a desire to really keep the composer separate. I mean, there's so many pieces that are anonymous, firstly, where it's just been lost to history and nobody knows who wrote it. And then you find people who composed in a position at a church, or in a position within the court of some rich or noble person, who their identity wasn't really at question. It was just a matter of, write the music, that's your job. More and more through the centuries, we've seen a shift towards a need for identity, and a need for identity in music, because, as Isaac put, much of pop music has lyrics, and lyrics being language that we can ideally understand, it's so much easier and so much more accessible to get to the idea behind what that person's saying. And sort of as you mentioned, Cynthia, the need to look behind the curtain isn't really as necessary when the points spoken are so overt. Which puts me in a weird spot as a composer, where I need to be thinking about how my piece is going to be interpreted, and how I myself interpret my piece without words. Of course, sometimes I write art song, but when I write for a singer and piano, I almost never write the poetry myself. It's always someone else's words that I'm using. All of a sudden, somebody's listening to my art song, and they're interpreting not just me and my intended meaning, but they're also interpreting the poet behind that. They're interpreting the singer who is interpreting me. It becomes this sort of almost a game of telephone, where these different people actively or passively come together. I mean, most of the poets I've set to music have been dead. I mean, it's public domain. but we come together, whether actively or not, and mutually and collaboratively construct meaning. We together create the idea that will then be received individually and subjectively by every person performing it and listening to it. So trying to figure out where I fit in all that, and where my transness and my queerness and my disability fit into all that, it's really it's quite a balancing act, and there's a lot to keep in mind.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think this is a good segue into my next question. So, tell us a bit about your research project and kind of the, I want to say like the, not necessarily inspiration, but what kind of sparked you to put research behind the work and your kind of everyday identity?
I think again it was a matter of not seeing what I wanted to see in the industry, not seeing myself represented. um, I it started out with a question that I would often receive. I'd perform a piece of music, or more aptly, I'd someone else would perform a piece that I wrote, and I would be approached sort of with an assumption that the music that I wrote was transgender, that it was transgender music because I wrote it. It's, if a Black person writes something, it's Black music, so on and so forth. And that assumption bears a lot of weight and comes with a lot of additional questions. Where what is transgender music? I mean, if you ask like the trans composers that I know, if you ask them if their music is transgender because they are transgender, you're going to get the full gamut of responses. You're going to get, yes, of course, my music is perfectly and completely transgender, and you can't take that away from me. If you're performing my work, it's going to be trans music, and you have to cope with that disrupting your system. You're going to get other people who say, of course not. My music is not transgender. My music is just music. For you to put that label on me is tokenizing, objectifying, transphobic.
Mm.
I don't, after all this, I still don't fully know where I fall in terms of responding to that question. But it did lead me to start with the question, what is transgender music, if anything? And what do I do that makes my music transgender that a cis composer doesn't or couldn't do? That eventually that question of what is transgender music, it became a little bit useless to me, because what I was just saying, where the answer is so subjective, you will never get this. You might get a similar answer once or twice, but you will never get a unified consensus from the trans community. So that sort of led me in the direction of, if trans music, so to speak, is assumed, either constructed by the trans composer or interpreted by the cis listeners who come and comment on my work, then really what's happening here is meaning is being constructed. So all of a sudden I looked at constructed meaning, and sort of the idea that no music has one specific meaning, as a lens through which we could, as trans people, see ourselves in music. I mean, you take examples like Mahler's Resurrection Symphony. There's a choral part where the German text is translated roughly to, I will die that I may find life. And, there's a transness to that. And I was listening to a podcast where Eric Peregrine, a trans conductor and chorister, really related to that, despite it being an old white man who died, forever ago. Despite that, still being able to find their own queerness and their own transness within that idea. So it wasn't really a matter of making my music trans or analyzing trans music, but rather analyzing how all of us might construct meaning in the works that we compose, perform, or listen to, and how that can be a gateway to a more personal connection to music, even when the identity labels of the people associated with that piece might not match up with ours.
It's really fascinating, and something jumped out at me at the beginning of what you were talking about there, because it's true, like the interpretation is so subjective on how we experience music. To label something as transgender music at the beginning because the composer, the writer is transgender, it can be so limiting, in that it puts one piece of the person first and overshadowing of the entire body of work. It made me think about that, the concept of transgender broken arm syndrome in hospitals, where sometimes a trans person will go to seek help for a broken arm, but they put the transgender piece first. And it's like, oh, did this happen because you're trans and maybe you're experiencing some mental health stress and it's related to that. And they get so bogged down in one piece of the person that they miss the big picture. And I think would I be correct in saying that you're speaking sort of a lot sort of to that, and that like, don't put that as one piece, but is a part of it, but it's not all of it.
Yes and no, I think.
Okay.
There are a lot of trans people, as I said, who really will put their trans identity at the foreground, and their work is trans. And even non-trans composers who write specific pieces. I mean, what comes to mind is the composer Omar Thomas, who wrote Mother of a Revolution for a concert band. And it's the piece itself is entirely dedicated to Marsha P. Johnson. That piece cannot exist without the idea of transness. That piece cannot be what it is without thinking about Marsha. And many of the people who come to me about my compositions have that exact transgender broken arm idea, where it's, a diagnosis, really. Before they've spoken to me, they diagnose that my music is transgender because I'm transgender. Personally, I don't foreground that identity. I don't hide it, but in relationship with my own body and with my own mind and my own spirit, I've chosen not to, hold up a sign. I exist in my space, and if people, can't jive with that, then they're probably not in my space, or they won't be for long. So for me personally, the trans part of me exists and is in conversation with the rest of me, and all of that combined is in conversation with my music.
Yeah, I think that's so true for so many trans people. And I personally myself, I struggle a lot with this when having discussions, especially ones that aren't focused on identity or like marginalization or community. I struggle a lot because when I enter a space, you want to be visible and you want to showcase that trans part of yourself, but you don't necessarily want it to be at the foreground of it, in my opinion, for myself. So it's a difficult conversation with yourself, especially when it comes to the art, because everything is so interpreted and everyone can interpret things differently. So you can take something super out of context. Um, so I think it's really interesting to hear different perspectives on that, because a lot of folks have that assumption that trans people always want that visibility. And that's absolutely true. We want visibility, but it doesn't need to come at a cost where it kind of paints over all the hard work that we've done and all of the beauty outside from something being trans.
And the reality there is that visibility is dangerous.
Yeah,
It's a
absolutely.
double-edged sword every time we think about it, because every time somebody knows that I'm trans, that puts the ball in their court as to whether they're going to choose violence today. I mean, if somebody didn't know that I was trans and heard a piece of music that I happened to write, maybe they'll associate it with transness, maybe they won't. And I think the most pertinent example of that would be the piece that I wrote that accompanied that research project, Et tibi miserere. Et tibi miserere is in Latin. I don't know if either of you are fluent.
Oh.
I only know enough Latin to sing in choirs, and that's sort of where the title came from. Is that so many trans people, for instance, will hear Et tibi miserere and they'll be like, okay, that's Latin, so this is from the Catholic Church. This piece probably comes from an ideology that doesn't respect me or support me. And that's totally valid. Like, how many of us, in the trans community think of, the institutions that have historically and repetitively harmed us, and we just shy away.
Can you translate what it means in English? Et tibi miserere?
Yeah. So Et tibi miserere is the third of 3 Latin lines that I use in the piece. And it starts with miserere nobis and miserere mei. Those meaning have mercy on us and have mercy on me, respectively. So when we hear those, we associate those with forgiveness from sin, especially in a way that is weaponized against the trans life, where merely existing is an act of sin that I need to apologize for and seek mercy for. Et tibi miserere, though, means and have mercy on yourself. It's something you're not going to find in any liturgical text whatsoever, and it led to some arguments with the kind of people who are not in my space around, how can you ask God to have mercy on himself? But even in that question, we get a lot of assumptions. Who am I praying to? Firstly, I took an approach that was panentheistic, and I learned that word over the course of the summer, which means sort of an idea that everything and everyone is contained within God. And even that's a little scary. Isaac's here like, who did I take on my podcast? But it's an idea separate from, the individual separate man in the sky that some people associate with a Christian God, and rather it looks at everything is a part of God, and therefore everything is sacred. The trees, the sky, the people, the interactions. For me, that means community. My community is part of God. My community, therefore, is sacred. Therefore, I'm using a lot of therefores. If I pray to God, I'm praying to my loved ones. And if I ask them to have mercy on me, to take care of me, I'd hope that I would ask my friends and my loved ones to take care of themselves too. Hence, et tibi miserere. It has the same sacred approach that many religious works of music have, but rather than it being a singular Christian God, what is sacred is the love that is there for my community. It really is. It's an ode to trans and queer love for me. Someone might not hear that if they just hear the text. I mean, it's not just Latin in there. There's English text by some public domain poets and myself. But if somebody hears the Latin, they may not know that. But when you look into that and sort of, again, look behind that curtain, this piece is, for me, explicitly and necessarily queer and trans in its love for the people that made it.
I love that. And I think, I mean, for me, I'm a cisgender I'm a cisgender person, but I'm the parent of a trans child, and we've been advocating for them from the very beginning, because they were too young to advocate for themselves. And from myself, from a theological point of view, like they were born in Ireland, and their dad is, raised very Irish Catholic, 8 brothers and sisters, and altar boys in the church, him and his best friend, who actually the priest always assumed that they were gay. And growing up in that, when we went through this transition and everything just with the Catholic Church, the law came into question around that. And my son was actually did their first communion before they had transitioned. But for us, the idea of spirituality, as you're talking about there, it has always been a sense of love and connection, I think, and that sense of belonging. And they have never felt married to one particular home or institution. For us, it's just all around us and wherever. We stopped going to church, formally years ago, but would consider ourselves still very spiritual. So, God isn't, married to any particular institution. And what you said is just it is really, really beautiful. Because I think, especially for my son, that having that element of spirituality is so important, because it is connection, it's love, and that feeling sense of belonging in the world, and knowing that you do belong, and that, you are needed, and that you are valid, but it doesn't have to come from any sphere of closed-minded religion.
Absolutely. And the idea, there's a split in ideas here, where your child isn't important because they're loved by a separate God, that because whatever they've done has been accepted. They're important because in this ideology, they're important because they are sacred. Exactly who they are is as important to me as any God, and exactly what they do and what they say and what they feel is as important as what any God might do, say, or feel. And that's really hard to grapple with, because we're often taught to minimize ourselves in the face of capitalism, in the face of various religions. But this approach, for me, maximalizes people and allows us to feel the importance that we all have to each other and to ourselves.
Yeah. And it comes from a very vulnerable place in people. Spirituality is very personal, very vulnerable. And would you say, in your experience as a composer, more specifically within like classical music, this is kind of the biggest challenge? Is kind of the relationship classical music has with religion in terms of being a trans composer, or would you maybe assign that to something else?
I don't think I often think about specifically the relationship between classical music and religion, because, through history, for every sacred piece, there's always been a secular piece. There's always been some of that space that exists within Christian environments, and there's some of that space that exists for the people. Much of a lot of early music might have drawn on folk tunes or music that the people in the streets might be whistling. For me, the bigger challenge, and I think some of this goes back to where trans identity has always been sort of parallel to, but not touching classical music, it's been the connection externally between classical music and the elite. There's always been an idea that really permeates marginalized communities now, and has for a long time, that classical music isn't for us. And that came in a lot of spaces where, Amy Beach was trying to compose at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th. And we had people, we had Dvorak coming along and saying, it's not bad for a woman. But, we've had Black composers composing, for at least as long as white composers. And even thinking about what composition is, there's been music and there's been song made by indigenous communities for centuries, if not millennia. And trans people have always existed somewhere in that space. Not to mention any number of worldwide interpretations of self and gender that don't fall under our colonial idea of transness. We've always been there, but we've been convinced and we've been taught, it's been drilled into our heads that these spaces aren't for us. So there's an idea that anytime a composer enters that space from the environment of a marginalized community, either they're being disruptive deliberately to sort of loudly and boldly express their self within music, and that's good on them. Then there's the other half that's the idea sort of comes along that this woman, this white cisgender, from a wealthy family woman, is coming in and sort of minimalizing her gender and just trying to exist within the same space and sort of putting herself to the side so that her music can shine. That's a question that comes up, where does my music fit to the standard that's been set? And what's the standard if not white cis heteropatriarchy? Sometimes my music does fit, sometimes it doesn't. But I think my real grappling with that was earlier in my compositional experience. I've only been composing for, a few years, but early on, I had that real worry about where I fit, if anywhere, into the space. But I think more recently, it's been a matter of realizing that there are going to be people who want to listen to your music, no matter who you are, no matter what you write. There are going to be people who want to listen, because there are going to be people who will love you. And I've since found communities of women composers, communities of disabled composers, communities of queer and trans composers. And I've found the environment in which I feel welcome. And this environment, we still create, excellent music, I like to think, but the focus is no longer exactly on, the deep harmonic texture and our use of these rhythmic and compositional devices and the deep theory of music. It's, for a lot of people, myself included, it's about meaning, and it's about where the music comes from and what the music does to glorify the self that we want to see. So it's sort of like an anti-elitism, and it's a focus on my music fits the standard because it's my standard for the music to fit.
There's so much power to that. So I'm just curious, do you have any goals, long-term, short-term goals, or where might we find you in 5 to 10 years? And it's a big question. It's like
Oh my
asking
goodness.
a high schooler what they want to do when they grow up, and no one ever knows. But
For the most part, I really hope that you'll find me doing pretty much the same thing that I'm doing now. Really, when I came into university, there was a need for me to learn to get better to be successful to make a life. But as I approach the end of my undergraduate, what's been 5 years now, it's really been the beginning of that still rings true. I learn to get better, but not better by, again, any standard. Rather, I learn so that I can navigate this world with some sense of understanding of myself and the world around me. I compose to express that understanding of myself and what I see. And that music gets performed by people who interpret that and add their own meaning. That's listened to by people who come to the concert with their own ideas around what the music will be. And so everything I do as a composer is part of a team. Whether all the team is aware that they're part of the team is another story, but what I do is only one component of the experience of music. So I really hope that as I continue and as I develop more connections with people and music, that my composition continues to exist in communication and dialogue with the people who want to experience it.
Hope, where can our listeners find your music now? Where can they go to if they want to sample some of your music and experience it?
The easy one is my website, hopeariamusic.com. Aria being ARIA. Perks of being trans is you get to choose your middle name, and mine just so happened to relate to music. I didn't actually know it was a musical term at the time, but hopeariamusic.com. That's also the name of my Facebook page, my Instagram. If you look up Hope Salmonson, SALMONSON on YouTube, you'll find something. There aren't a lot of Salmonsons, so you'll be able to find me wherever you look.
Links in the show notes and as well to make it as easy as possible for people to connect.
Yeah, and I can attest Hope's work is definitely inspirational, so highly recommend.
Shucks.
I listen to it from time to time,
The
that is a
little
huge
bit
honor,
that I
truly.
experienced, I loved it really. Yeah.
Yeah, it's as I kind of said in the beginning, it's really interesting to kind of do these deep dives, and especially when it comes to people who compose their own music, because you really get I'll say the insider scoop on what kind of motivates you to do what you do. And the beauty of music and art in general is that it has everlasting life. So, this will live on farther than all of us. And I think that's really exciting.
That's the dream. And
Yeah.
the huge compliment here is that you both have taken such a liking to the music. And that's, if I may, make a brash assumption, it seems that neither of you are like deeply into what we call classical music. And that what that means to me is sort of the philosophy that's been guiding my music since I started composing, which is, I didn't grow up with your Bach or your Mozart, your Brahms, whoever. I grew up with the Dixie Chicks on my mom's radio, and sort of whatever songs that my mom used to rollerblade to at the rink. So my guiding philosophy was, can my mom whistle along to this? Can my mom be tapping her foot in the car on the way home? And now that I've really come to understand my place and my position of transness within the compositional process, I similarly hope that the trans and queer people who have forever been told that classical music is not for them can listen to my music, and even if they don't get into it, if they can listen to my music and enjoy part of it for 5 minutes, that's far more important than any accolade I'll ever receive.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on the show, and
Yes.
And thank you so much for your time and talking to us. And you'll be hearing from me because I'm going to be exploring your music more. And so thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Hope.
Thank you for having me.
That's all the time we have today, folks. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Hey Sis.
The conversation doesn't have to stop here, though. If you would like to get in touch with us to ask us a question or share your story on a future episode, you can email us at connect@simplygoodform.com or visit us on our website at www.heysis.com.